this is a wonderful time to be an animal scientist. This is, there's so much opportunity. We can have such an amazing impact on food production now. This is a wonderful time.
And welcome to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gail Carpenter, State Dairy Extension Specialist at Iowa State University. And I'm joined today actually by one of my fellow hosts, Joe McFadden. And Joe's taking the other side of the microphone today to talk a little bit about his work. Joe's an associate professor of dairy cattle biology at Cornell University. And Joe, I was reading through your LinkedIn, and I think we applied for the same job. Okay. But then I was reading through and looking at all of your other background that you have. And now I was fresh out of a PhD when I applied. And so I don't feel quite as bad anymore. You spent some time at Johns Hopkins at as a postdoc and a visiting scientist. You were at West Virginia University for a little while, finished your PhD at Virginia Tech in 2009, it looks like. So what brought you to Cornell, and what have you been working on since you got there?
Well, it all starts with like an email, how these things all get started. And in reality, I guess I never anticipated coming back to where it all started, let alone the exact office where it started in undergrad. So that was a bit surreal. But, I think the reason why is, well, I'm from New York. My wife is from New York, and we're obviously want to just get closer to home. At the same time, Cornell provides a lot of opportunity in the dairy nutrition space. And, when I first got started here, it was sort of what we were traditionally known for. That's nutritional physiology and looking at the role of sort of glucose utilization in the cow. And I don't know, but then you get tenure and you say, let's just shake it up a bit. And that's what we did. And so the lab now is gone almost a completely different direction, focusing predominantly on methane emissions and move towards the future a lot more on energetics. And so I'm looking forward to see how it evolves.
Your partner in improving animal performance, Berg & Schmidt. They provide high-quality, economical feed ingredients for ruminants, like their well-researched coated nutrients and fat powders that can support cows with additional available energy, which improves their overall health, productive performance, and your cost efficiency.
So how'd you switch from the glucose space to the methane space, or the emission space?
Yes, it's been a wild ride. I'll tell you that, for the last 3 years, because I went from zero to 100 in this methane space. Like, I didn't have, I guess I was looking around at my sort of environment here at Cornell, and I think Cornell has been historically known for contributing to the efficiency space, but we really didn't have any expertise in the methane mitigation space from a direct methane mitigation perspective. And at the same time, how this really all started was, I think my admins realized pretty quickly that we all have a bit of a knack for grant writing, but they said, you go after this equipment grant. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that or not. And I did, and I didn't get it. But that sort of set the seed for, I really wanted a respiration chamber system. I really wanted to study energetics. I thought that was something that we could bring back. And at the same time, we didn't have one. We didn't have that unit. So thanks with some seed funding from some corporations in the state of New York, we just pulled that off. And that sort of kickstarted it. And then I just started studying, and I was like, for those that know me, I love mechanisms. I like figuring out how things work. And, that was the whole story around glucose use. I really want to understand insulin resistance. And when it comes to the methane story, and when it comes to all these additives in this space, there's a lot of them. We just don't know how things work. And for me, that was a bit of a concern and a bit of a challenge. And I thought maybe that's where I could potentially contribute.
That's kind of a fun plot twist. Yeah. I was reading, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit. We ask our guests to indicate some topics that they want to share.
Yeah.
And you put fat, sustainability, gut digestion, health, enteric methane, and India dairy. And intuitively, those don't all feel like they belong with each other.
That's the thing.
Do they fit together?
Oh, they do. They so much do. And, I think that's what I try to teach my graduate students and postdocs in the lab is that, I think in our field, we tend to, really focus in on our expertise. Like you can say, oh, that person there is a lipid biologist, or that person, that person studies the gut. That's what they're known for. But I'd like to think that we're all animal scientists, which we are, and the animal is a system, and so these things all relate to each other. And so, I don't know. I love just learning. I love studying different aspects of animal science, and it all sort of relates to each other. And I think the more we know about that interaction, I think the more likely we are to develop solutions that really impact the whole system beneficially. So, yeah, when I look at that list of terms there, obviously I'm a lipid biologist. That's how I got my training, and I still do a ton of fatty acid work now, but it certainly relates to methane emissions. There's a topic we can get in there in terms of fatty acids, and on the India side, I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I could be developing a lab that would have a strong presence in India. And that just sort of came out through the interactions with various NGOs, and there's a lot of opportunity in this space to improve cattle and buffalo nutrition in that region of the world. And so, yeah, we're just sort of going where we need to go based on demand.
Well, can you tell me a little bit more about that program? How did you get connected out there? What have you guys been working on? What's the impact that you're having? Really simple questions, right?
No, really simple, but it's probably going to be, if I were to flash forward 3 decades from now, think of, hey, do I retire? They're like, no, I'll wait another decade. Like in that period of my life, I'm going to look back and say, what was like the biggest challenge of my program? And I think this is going to be it. There's 300 million cattle and buffalo in India. It has managed by over 75 million smallholder farmers. Milk production per animal is quite low. And so methane intensity is quite high per unit of milk. So the question is, what are they already doing? And that was sort of where I was a bit naive, to be honest, going into this project, not really knowing, what their system is and where they're leading in this space. But then, there's several NGOs. So the Environmental Defense Fund and Global Methane Hub are 2 NGOs that I've been able to interact with and support this effort. And so we're really at a pivotal point because it took about a year and a half of real planning to find strategic partners. And many of these agreements are unfolding this very moment. But I feel confident in saying that we're really focused on 2 regions of India, Haryana and Maharashtra, just sort of northern and middle India. And there are some really key partners in this region of India that really could help sort of with the main objective, which is to help build an advanced feed library for the country of India. And this is an immense challenge that it will probably take a lifetime for anybody to want to try to achieve. There's hundreds of different types of ingredients that are really unique to the India dairy production system. And we also know, when I had several chances now to visit these different regions of India, how they feed cows can vary within a village. It can vary across the country. And so how do we incorporate ration balancing in this region of the world is something they're already thinking about. The National Dairy Development Board has developed a ration balancing program. They basically develop diets on the basis of total digestible nutrients, crude protein, calcium, and phosphorus. That is it. And so they also really don't have a feed library to go much more beyond that. And so that's where we think we could potentially contribute. So we're hiring a team of postdocs here, plan on hiring staff on the ground in India to help facilitate an extensive sample collection over the next 3 years. The goal is to send probably, we're sort of estimating between 6,000 and 8,000 feed samples to Cumberland Valley to perform a complete analysis, nutrient analysis of these feeds, work with the International Livestock Research Institute, as well as Cumberland Valley, to develop NIR capabilities in the country, and also provide opportunities for scientists in India to receive the appropriate laboratory training that they require to develop these methodologies in the country itself. Really, by year 3, we want to be able to make sure that the laboratory capabilities of India are self-sufficient in this area, and work with different government and NGO groups in India to imagine what is version 2.0 of their ration balancing program. Where do we go next, and with incremental gains? We realize that we're not going to get CNCPS version 7.0. I don't even have access to that yet.
When are we going to get access to that? They've been saying that for a while.
We should just go over and knock on Mike's door and put pressure on him here. No, I get. We have. It's coming, but what I'll say is that this has been a really joy for me personally. This project in India, because I'm learning so much. And they're doing great things already. And I just hope that I can meet their expectations over the next couple of years.
So after India, then what? Do you have other countries that you think?
This is ambitious. So I think any good scientist would say you have to focus at some point. And having I can be, I can certainly have wide interests personally, but I'm really going to need to focus on India. So I will say that I have other colleagues participating in this. And so I work solely here with the Environmental Defense Fund in Haryana, will likely be the National Dairy Research Institute in Cornell. But in the rest of the project, we're partnering with Ermes Kebriab at UC Davis. He's a project lead, and he's focused on other countries in South Asia, like Vietnam. And, there's certainly an interest to expand across South Asia and into Africa. I think we have to really demonstrate that we can meet our objectives here. Working in a different country, you are completely reliant on the people in that country, right? To make sure that you succeed, and that's a lesson in patience. That's a lesson in good communication, and you have to work hard at it. You have to work constantly at it, because in the end, there are people of India, people of any of these countries. They're the ones who are going to solve it. It's not going to be Joe McFadden. So we have to, it's going to take some time. That's all I'm trying to say. And we want to be, I look at a smallholder production system. You'd be hard pressed, in my opinion, to find something that is well organized and thought through as the production system of India. So I guess I'm very privileged to work there first.
Well, that's very cool. I want to take a step back to something else you talked about, which is you are a lipid biologist. You started out with fatty acids, and you said you're still doing fatty acids work. How are you marrying your passion for lipids and your new research in methane and sustainability? Oh, yeah.
Well, people have heard me this. If anybody's heard me talk recently, they probably heard me say this again. But, when it comes to fats and lipids, when you look at the methane literature, you typically see something in the title, the effects of fats on emissions, effects of fat feeding on emissions, methane emissions. And I say to myself, and I just said this at a meeting in Idaho, and I was like, what have we learned? Like, we learned that fatty acids themselves are very unique, right? When it comes to how nutrients are used by the animal in terms of nutrient partitioning, we've learned that their digestibility is quite unique. But yet we still generalize fats when it comes to enteric methane mitigation. And we tend to put ourselves into these things where it just feels comfortable. But the reality is there's a lot of unknowns regarding lipids. And specific fatty acids could certainly have a very unique difference when it comes to methane emissions. So, for instance, oils, we're talking unsaturated fatty acids could have stark reductions in methane production. And I'm really thinking about medium chain fatty acids that are unsaturated, medium chain fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids like linoleic acid or linoleic. Whereas saturated fatty acids are really going to do hopefully a nice job of decreasing methane intensity, because they do a good job increasing energy corrected milk production. And even though they might not have an impact on methane production, grams per day in the rumen, they're going to be able to produce more energy corrected milk. So what I'm arguing is that we have to think about individual fatty acids and how they influence production yield and intensity of methane, because they probably do so very uniquely. And then the next question is, how do you use fatty acid feeding as a way to complement other feed additives that directly inhibit methane production? So, for instance, seaweed, bromoform, 3-NOP, things like that. And so we're very excited that, with some private foundation support, Gerstner Philanthropies, from Danone and from the state of California, we have a sizable award now to study the effects of individual fatty acids and their impacts on emissions, but also how fatty acids interact with dietary Asparagopsis taxiformis or bromoform feeding. And obviously, all of these studies are going to serve us well when we want to think about energy use. And so we're very happy to announce that our respiration chamber system is open for business. For people that know me, this has been like a 3-year process, major renovations of facilities and installations. But these are the first studies that are going to go through the respiration chamber system.
Are your chambers going to have any downtime for the next 5 years, or are they pretty booked up?
Well, I think there's been a lot of excitement, and and I think we thought a lot internally here about making sure that we push forward the best possible science, which I think is any institution does that. It's gonna. I would say with 2025 is looking pretty full already, and because I was sort of delaying everybody, 2024 we've got a little space in there, but I'm sure that will fill right up real quick.
So, do you have cows in there right now? Are you in the process of the first study?
Well, no, I'm getting trained this week. I'm getting trained.
Oh, wow.
To use them. So I think it's tomorrow or it's Thursday. I have to look at my calendar, but goal is for our entire crew to get trained. I hired a research associate to run them. And there's 4 of these units, climate controlled, methane, CO2, hydrogen, oxygen, and we're adding, and phase 2 will be ammonia and nitrous oxide. We're just going to take a little longer to get those analyzers in there, but they're coming.
So and really hot off the press.
Yeah. So the first study we're doing is a respiration chamber system by green feed protocol sort of experiment. There's been some studies. There's obviously green feed is something that everybody talks about in the space. We have green feeds. We use them here, and we'll have 2 I'll be sending to India for our efforts in India. Quite possibly will be the first green feeds in India. And in their use, we've learned that we've got some questions about how accurate green feed is under different production scenarios, different protocols of use. So we also have a protocol for using green feeds on our own dairy, and the goal is to sort of test that protocol versus a chamber system and see what we learn. I had a postdoc, Dr. Fontoura, who did a meta-analysis that will hopefully be accepted for a presentation at ADSA this year, the annual meeting, and where she worked with data sets with green feed and chamber data in the same study. There's some questions about agreement. And so we just want to just continue to probe that a bit more.
So, but you use green feeds right now. So green feeds are still useful. They're giving useful data then?
Yeah. So when it comes to green feed, when I publish something, we have, our first papers are in review on the methane space, and we're calling it relative efficacy until I learn more. Perhaps there might need to be some correction factors we're thinking about to be more, absolute in our measurement. But we obviously use them. We have 3 currently at our dairy. We're probably going to get a 4th one here, and then obviously the ones in India we'll be using. So they're nice because they get you a lot of data every day, right? Mm-hmm. And whether using a tie stall and freestall, I think the answers could be slightly different. And then there's a lot of pros and cons with using them, just like with any tool. Chamber's got a lot of cons. So I'm not oblivious to that. So, but there's also a lot of other methane sensors that are in the space that are emerging. If I had to guess the number of startups that I've spoken to in the last year, it would be a triple-digit number. And I feel like in the enteric methane mitigation monitoring space, it's insane. But the goal is to get to a lower cost methane sensor. The green feed's not going to be the solution, and I'm sure CELOC's not a big fan of me saying that, but there's going to have to be something that's going to be lower cost, more high throughput, to really to speed this up a bit.
Yeah, I think that's something I think about a lot is the challenges of collecting that data and making sure it's good data, because this is an important topic. And it's good to hear you say that, there's still a lot of value to that data, because sometimes I wonder what's going to happen if we get too many studies and realize that it's all junk or something, because not all of us can afford respiration chambers. And even you're saying it took you a while to get them up and going. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens in this space in the next few years, because it's definitely something that's important that we want to be able to get better data on.
And one thing I'm seeing is that, you have data, I have data, we all have data. And I don't know, I know there's some efforts I heard of trying to organize data across labs. And, we've had a discussion last week about, we have a lot of data we're generating from all these different studies. And we just hired Dr. Neil Hostens. And, he's a data analytics guy, right? And he's like, well, he could have access to all of our data. And I'm like, well, how do we organize data, right? And how can we do this across labs? And because there's this whole space in data science now that people could really benefit from our studies. That are, all of our studies are expensive in any institution. We could probably do a better job, and I really need some efforts in this space.
Yeah, I remember my PhD advisor saying stuff like that, a few years ago now, and we're still figuring it out.
I don't know. It's like the way, I really wish there was some finding opportunities that were really about that. We're about organizing data across labs, using data across labs. I don't know. Those things are sometimes hard to find. But
yeah. Maybe Neil can figure it out.
Yeah.
So you talked about fatty acids a bit. And one of the other things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, what are the broader impacts of these strategies that we use to inhibit enteric methane? So an easy example of that might be seaweed, right? And seaweed has the harvesting, the transport, the processing, all of that has its own footprint, right? And so I think when we're looking at the footprint of technologies like that, we need to look more broadly, right, at what the whole system is and not just what the impact on the cow is, because it's great if it reduces enteric methane, but if we're having to truck everything from California to Iowa for the long term, that's gonna have its own share of issues, right? The other one that I kind of think about sometimes is, you mentioned the saturated fats as a way to increase or decrease methane intensity. And palm fat sometimes gets a little bit of a bad rap for maybe not being the greenest or most sustainable harvesting method. So do you think about that? There's no easy answers to this, but do you have any answers to some of these questions?
Yeah, for instance, over in India, I hear that, they're thinking about incorporating more palm, right? Well, that's an expensive endeavor, but and there's a lot of questions about its production and its impact on the environment. And I certainly rely a lot of those in this space to provide me confidence that these things that they're being considered. And I know there's some sort of sustainable palm pact or something that some of these countries really want to make sure that they're not expanding their carbon footprint in this space, or they're negatively impacting the environment any worse than they currently are. But I think when it comes to fats, one of the things we got to keep in mind that there's a limit to this, right? There's a limit to how much fat you can add, and so this is something that just can't grow out to exorbitant proportions, because typical diets, at least in North American diets here, will be 5.5%, 6% total fat, and not all that's coming from palmitic. So I think we got to be a little bit careful there. I think this also gives us an opportunity too to think a little bit more about stearic acid, for example, and how we could potentially influence biohydrogenation and just leverage sort of other fats that are in the diet to influence intensity. And this is not a new topic. Stearic acid feeding has been a discussion for decades, but it's certainly when you talked about like what other things are these additives doing, like you're talking about seaweed, and seaweed's a great example too, where and there's a lot of excitement on this. I'm not going to question that, but the drops in intake are something you would see at a high fat feeding level, or you might see also with seaweed and bromoform feeding. That's quite consistent. Now there's iodoform. You can actually see drops in intake on that as well. And I really like to see, obviously there's a known mechanisms of action for how these halogens decrease methane production, but drops in intake themselves also can contribute to drops in methane production. Obviously drops in milk yield too are also observed. And so what I've learned by talking to a lot of these companies, so I've talked to Future Feeds, Ambrosia, Ruminate, a couple others in this space, Alga Biosciences. But is that there's really a question about stability when it comes to these compounds. And so one of the things we often ignore is, and we need to think more about is, the shelf life of these things. So how is it going to be used out in the field? And as scientists, we're like, oh, I got something out of the freezer. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to put it in. I know exactly where it was. I know how it was stored. I know all these conditions. But heck, even at our farm, sometimes this can be a bit of the Wild West. And so we have to really study that aspect of the science. And so with this California project that we have with the state of California, it's going to investigate these products, these different technologies from these different companies side by side. And this is where I think is an exciting area of science right now, is that we're going to put these techs side by side. We're going to see who wins, like kind of thing. We want to make sure that we have safe and effective technologies, and it's up to us as scientists to make sure that. And I've been saying this on social media a bit lately. We're the gatekeepers, right, for these solutions. That it comes down to us, and so we're going to probe the stability issue quite extensively. And look at the intake and help develop what we think is an appropriate feeding strategy in 1x feeding level. Because as you start to think about product registration and getting things approved for use, you really need to start thinking about what is that target dose. And so, all right, let me just talking here, but the last sort of comment I have is about what other impacts these things could have. And right now, the argument is efficiency. Well, potentially that efficiency is at the cost of intake, and so we got to question it a bit. There's not a lot of studies that have looked at these studies in animals that like transition cows or lactation cows, where drops in intake are not necessarily a favorable thing. And so we also need to make sure that to understand where the energy is going, where how is the hydrogen being used, and they know that a lot of the hydrogen is being emitted. And there was a recent study looking at iodoform that saw stark reductions in methane production, and they were able to estimate like 40% of the hydrogen, roughly half, I forget the exact number, was actually retained by the animal, and the other half was emitted. Well, this really opens up the opportunity for feed additive manufacturers to think about, what do we use as a co-supplementation strategy to sort of optimize hydrogen use. And so, I see some opportunity evolving there in that 3-P monensin space. Obviously, monensin helping improving efficiency. And there's also, biohydrogenation itself relative to propionate as a minor hydrogen sink, but that has also been considered. There were some studies looking at canola oil feeding, for example. So I think that's where it's getting really exciting, and making sure that these outcomes are they last a long time. And there's a bit of concern that the cow is potentially adapting to these additives, but I express caution because is it adaptation? Is it microbial adaptation, which is quite possible, quite likely? But it also could be a stability issue that maybe we don't thoroughly document when it comes to these additives.
So if we're not going to hold you to this or anything, right? But if you put on your hopped in your time machine and went forward 50 years or even 20 years, what do you think it's going to look like for the dairy industry to be climate neutral?
It's going to take some time. There was a chance to speak at that Feed Summit meeting at UC Davis last year, and there was a question about, what do you think? How are we going to are we going to get to this goal of 30-40% reduction by 2030? And if not, what do you think this percent reduction looks like? And we all went through the whole panel. We all just shouted out a bunch of random numbers, and if I had to give you an average, it was like 10%. The reality is that where is that question being focused on? Is that question for an individual farm? Is it for the state, or for the region, for the country, for the world, right? And for the world, that's where I think we need to be thinking, because once the methane is emitted, that methane just doesn't recognize any country's borders. And my concern here is that we get too focused on our individual. And I get it. We got to. We're a country, and this is what we got to do. We got to focus on our own agenda. We get it. But at the same time, it's one planet kind of concept. And U.S., European countries are most likely going to have to get to that place faster, much faster than these other countries, because we're also going to help compensate for countries that can't necessarily meet that agenda. So it puts more pressure on us to make sure that our mitigation strategies are robust and that we're aiming high, kind of thing, because there's a lot of pressure on us to do this better than most can do it. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that it's going to take some time. In terms of the technologies themselves, and this, I thought that you were going to ask this question about what do I think is going to be the winning solution. And there's no winning solution here, no individual solution. And I think there's a lot of excitement around getting beyond 50%. I don't get a lot of excitement. I don't wake up in the morning and say to myself, I'm going to go study a rumen modifier that it decreases emissions like 5% or something. I don't get really excited by that. And it's not to say it doesn't have a role. Joe McFadden doesn't get excited about it. Okay, this is Joe McFadden does not get excited by rumen modifiers. It's fine. It's my issue to contend with.
It's different things for different people. Yeah. I don't get excited about fatty acids.
Yeah, exactly. Not everybody's as passionate about palmitic and ceramide as I am. I get it. But at the same time, we gotta aim high for some of these things. And so, and I still think they have a role. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a role for rumen modifiers in this methane mitigation space. I think co-supplementation is getting a lot of excitement and probably can get to these robust reductions beyond 50% with something like a rumen modifier added. Those are the essential oils of the world, that kind of thing. But we need time and research and money for all these things.
We've spent a lot of time talking about like the future and what the future looks like and thinking about kind of some of these big picture things moving forward. On an individual level, what can we be doing right now to help us make those first steps in the right direction?
What I've learned from this California Department of Food and Agriculture proposal was that, as scientists, we tend to think about our region, right? So in the Northeast, I feed Northeast diets, right? These are going to be, because compared to California, they're higher forage diets, less byproducts. But in this CDFA proposal, I have to start feeding in these studies California diets. So we will be feeding low forage diets, lots of byproducts, get almond hulls over here. Might be the first time we ever fed almond hulls at Cornell, who knows? But the thought process there is that, one, we have to, at least as a scientific community, we have to realize that the solutions that when we might push forward might only be suitable or work well on our production system. So forage level, fiber digestibility, fat levels, depending on the nutrient, these additives are very likely to work different. And they've already shown that with 3-NOP, that NDF level and lipid level influences the 3-NOP response, right? And so when you look at something like essential oils, a lot of the work on essential oils was done on diets with 70% fiber, 70% forage diets, 60-70% forage diets, and not necessarily North American diets. And so we just have to express a little caution there. I think on farm, what we were sort of excited about was that, one, we have to think about what we currently can do, and fatty acids in the space provide some sort of assurance that maybe we could get to that 20-30% reduction with something like fatty acids, which are already approved. And that's just why we needed a little more focus in on that, because it's something we can do today. We also think that, the one thing that's really hurting us to get to is that approval process. And I'm not the person to talk about this, but, how do you get additives approved faster? And it's something that needs to happen ASAP, is to think about how we can sort of speed up that process a bit. And there's a lot of people thinking about this from in the NGO space. And I know there's even legislation now looking at how to speed this up. I think that's going to be super critical to get us to a space where we have actual methane mitigators that have a definitive claim. 300P is going to come around. I'm pretty confident that, I was told, I thought it was going to happen much faster, but, these things come and go, and they're going to, 300P in this space was something they would probably be able to do here in the short term. I'm very hopeful of that, or Bovaer, for those that don't know what I'm talking about.
All right. And one last question, kind of unrelated before we move to the end.
Yep.
You mentioned way at the beginning, you said you have a knack for grant writing. What are your favorite grant writing tips?
Oh, wow. I wish I had a whole thing to talk about this. I actually love grant writing. People probably hate it. I don't know. I just love it. I love it. And then I was trained by, I got to give him credit. His name was Dr. Brad Hillgardner. So when I was at West Virginia, I wrote my first USDA grant. Horrible. Okay. Absolutely horrible. And I was like, well, you got to go get some advice. And I went to some colleagues. I came back with a little word scratched out, and I was like, oh, man, I must have did a good job. And then I was like, well, Brad Hillgardner, this guy got I don't know what it was, and many USDA grants over the years. I said, let me go over to biomedicine and let him look at it. He came back to me and said, you're obviously never trained in grantsmanship. This is like the worst grant I've ever read. And I was like, okay. And he worked through it with me over the holidays. It was over Christmas, I remember. He came to my office on New Year's. This is a guy that just went above and beyond, and he obliterated it. But in that process, I definitely learned how to write grants from him. And it became, so my first piece of advice for young faculty is to find somebody that is going to rip apart your grant to shreds. And so you just be better at it. And the next part is, make sure that you're a good storyteller. We had a professional development workshop for grad students last week, and the speaker said the same thing, that grant writing is a process in storytelling. And, you have to convince people that your story is worth studying, worth investing. And it comes down to strong scientific justification, clear thought, a bit, organized logic, and making sure that, be a little bit repetitive at times too, because people read these things one time. The more repetitive you can be, this actually can help you to a degree, and don't be overly ambitious.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have to have you come back then to do another episode just on grant writing.
Oh, okay. All righty. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Any last thoughts before we move into our 3 questions that all our hosts get?
Any last thoughts? Well, I got to get ready for class here. I teach nutritional physiology and biochemistry here. And so I have to go get my notes ready for that. But no, I think this is an exciting time to be an animal scientist. When I was in grad school, there was all this drama about, there's not going to be any more funding, and what's left of animal science. I don't know. There was a bit of that going around in the graduate student field, and I am pleasantly pleased that is not the case. This is a wonderful time to be an animal scientist. This is, there's so much opportunity. We can have such an amazing impact on food production now. This is a wonderful time. And you might say to yourself, I don't want to study methane. You know what? Well, sometimes you're just going to have to bend a little, because you can study methane, but you can still study energetics. You can still study digestion. Methane is, again, one part of the system, bringing us full circle. That it's not the one all be all kind of scenario. So, just be adaptable.
Good advice.
It's time for our famous 3.
Additive, a global leader in nutritional solutions and the provider of Smart Amine N, the best-in-class rumen-protected methionine product for dairy producers who want to optimize milk production, capture more value from their components, and maintain their lifetime performance of their herds. For more product information and to calculate your return on investment when you balance your feed with amino acids, go to milkpay.com.
And I think that's a good segue into our 3 questions that we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
The first one being, as you know, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Oh, favorite dairy book or related resource. I'm looking at the NASM right now. I'm not sure that would be it. I think what I'm going to say is my favorite thing to read, or this sounds also absolutely insane, but dissertations. I love reading the cutting edge. Most advisors that have to read dissertations over and over and over, I get it. It can be a process. But that said, I like looking at the most cutting edge stuff. I get so excited about seeing what other people are doing, and I think we got to do a better job of doing it. I know there's been a lot of seminars now. I think Iowa does this, where they post some of the seminars that are happening at their university for others to enjoy. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more acknowledgement of what we're doing well, from like me telling you, hey, you're doing a great job in this space. We tend to acknowledge each other within our university systems, but or we have to have some sort of formal award. But I think when it comes to social media, it's a really powerful tool to do this. That if I see a new student who just graduated and I have a chance to listen to their talk or even read their dissertation, I certainly want to let them know that we're doing a good job and it's exciting science. So yeah, new dissertations and theses. It sounds absurd, I know, but that's probably what I like to do.
Nice. So what is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
Okay. Well, I love, like I said, learning. So, and I put YouTube in this category. This is going to sound absolutely crazy, but YouTube is a place where you can learn absolutely anything, right? And I would say 5 years ago, I didn't watch a single YouTube. I was a latecomer to the YouTube thing. And I was like, I don't want to sit there and watch all this nonsense. But then I go on there, I learned how to fix my car. I got a new tractor and I want to understand this. Or like I said, I'm in the maple production. I learned resources on there. Granted, you have to watch a few things over and over to understand and get fact from fiction kind of thing. Understand this is really a solution to your problem. But YouTube has been a great resource for me. It's usually how I wind down. And my wife does not necessarily like that. But late at night, I'm probably watching just calm down, watch some YouTubes. I'm learning about something different. And that's been a great resource. Just listening to other people, go through challenges that I need to overcome.
I was just talking to a friend of mine about that this weekend, how it was so much harder to learn things 20 years ago than it is now. You had to go to books or read articles. I have a friend who actually taught herself how to breed cows on YouTube. She didn't have, her and her husband purchased a new dairy and they didn't have any kind of out away from all of the, support and consultants and all that. And so she just hopped on YouTube and taught herself how to AI cows. So,
well, I don't even the side note is I don't do this anymore, but at my past house down in my basement, I had a complete hydroponic garden. Like this was an NFT system. I knew nothing about hydroponics, and I was growing lettuces and different types of root vegetables and things. And I learned all of this from a YouTuber called MHP Gardner. And so it's a wild world on YouTube.
Yeah, you can learn anything anymore. All right. And the last question we ask is, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
I would say those that are willing to fail. It's a sort of corny answer, but when I look at how we push and how we innovate, what's the next level of what we do? You really got to take some risks, and I think to really propel the field forward a bit. And so a certain level of risk taking, a certain level of an urgency to break the status quo kind of scenario that we get so stuck sometimes in the current way to do things. And what I try to at least teach my students is that we're gonna push hard, and some of the questions that we want to ask, that we want to explore, we might not be right. There's probably a good chance we're not going to be right. It's completely fine. And I think it's hard for junior professionals to realize that they feel like they got to get it right every time. And I was one of those people, 100%. When I was younger, my 30s. It took me a little later maybe than most, but I felt like I had to have everything right. And if I had something wrong and I did something wrong, I failed at something, God, I took it to heart. But now I fail a lot. But to me, it's like, whatever, you live and learn. And it comes with age and maturity and things like that. And I encourage young people that are listening to not be so hard on themselves and take a degree of risk and be okay with failing.
I actually just read, over break, I read Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. Okay. And I'm reading it with a couple of my couple of my students this semester. But he has the first chapter is all about becoming a creature of discomfort and actively seeking out ways that you get outside of your comfort zone. And what you said then made me think he has actually one of his recommendations that he makes for action is to set a mistake budget. So set a goal for a minimum number of mistakes you want to make in a week. Because if you make mistakes, that means that you're learning and you're trying new things. So he actually recommends setting a minimum number of mistakes that he wants to do.
That's great. And I think I think we need to be more vocal about that. I mean, social media is a great example where we tend to just highlight everything that's going well in our lives. And then you get this fake reality that, oh, everything's so great for Gail, Right. But in reality, we fail like half the time or more. And we have to really be more, I think, open and transparent about that. And it's okay. We're there to probably support each other. I'll support you, Gail, and you support me. And we'll get right through it.
Go team.
All right.
Well, thanks, Joe. I know you have to get ready for class, so appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with us and to sit on the other side of the mic. It was really exciting to hear some of the stuff you've been working on.
No problem. Thank you.